Chapter 12. Roadkill. A car raced toward Delia. She stood frozen in place. The headlights blinded her. Her body wouldn't move. The coat held her tight, restricting her movement. The driver revved the engine, accelerating. "No!" Delia screamed, unable to even raise her hands to protect her face. They were locked at her sides, encased in the coat, and stuck in place. What was happening? How was it happening? She braced herself for the impact, fully expecting that it would kill her, when suddenly someone slammed into her, pushing her out of the way. It was Grant. She was processing the fact that he'd saved her as they crashed to the pavement together. A tangle of arms and legs. The car sped past, nearly clipping Delia's boots. It left Delia and Grant lying there in a cloud of dust and debris. The driver honked maniacally, then zoomed out of the parking lot, vanishing down the road with a squeal of rubber. Delia spotted the name of the car model on the back of the trunk. Panther DeVille. She locked eyes with Grant. He was breathing hard and clutching his elbow. There was a hole in his hoodie and a scrape on his arm, but he looked okay otherwise. "Wow, that was close," he said in a shaky voice. Yeah, you literally just saved my life." "I guess," he said modestly. "Anyone would do the same." He shook his arm out and stood up, brushing himself off. Delia scrambled to her feet as well, noticing his hands were skinned and caked with gravel. "Are you kidding? That was total superhero stuff. Thank you." Grant blushed. "It was pretty cool, wasn't it?" Delia gave him a wan smile, feeling queasy suddenly. "Hey, are you okay?" Grant asked. I don't know." Her limbs were tingly from being held in place, but they'd finally become unstuck. She didn't understand what had just happened. Had she frozen up in fear, or was it something more? It had felt as if the coat was holding her prisoner, keeping her from jumping out of the way. But that was impossible. "Maybe you should sit," Grant gestured at the curb along the sidewalk, and Delia sat down heavily. "Geez, talk about major road rage," he said, looking in the direction the car had driven off. "We should report the driver. Did you see the plates?" Delia shook her head, following his gaze. "I couldn't see the driver either," she told him. The headlights blinded me, but I did see the name of the car. It was a Panther DeVille, and it was red and looked kind of antique too." "Well, you should at least tell the school," he said. "You could have been killed." "I have no idea why she wanted to run me over," Delia started, but then she remembered the cackling laughter and what the driver had yelled at her. "I thought you didn't see the driver." "I didn't." "So how do you know it was a she?" he asked. "Darling, you're not worthy of my culture." Because she heard that voice. Could that really be why? Was whoever behind the wheel after her coat? But nobody knew that she'd taken the coat from the alley. She'd been completely alone when she'd done it. And even if someone somehow did see her, how would they know that she would be in the school parking lot at this specific time? Even Delia hadn't known that she would be out here. Delia shuddered, despite the warmth of the coat. The driver had said it was my couture. If this was actually the famous Cruella coat, that meant it had once belonged to the mysterious designer herself. But nobody knew if she had even been a real person. Plus, even if she was a real person, she would be long dead. None of this made any sense. What were you doing out here anyway?" Delia asked, choosing to ignore his last question. "Well, you looked pretty upset after getting your picture taken," Grant said. "I saw you run out of the auditorium, so I decided to check on you." "I didn't think it would be a superhero moment." "Thank you," she said. "If you hadn't come after me, I'd be—" She trailed off. Their eyes met, but then she looked away. This day had started out strange and just gotten stranger. First the numbness when she'd woken up, then her face looking blank and plastic in all her school photos. Then the near accident and the fact that the coat had seemed to want her to get run over. And had she really heard that voice shouting about her couture? What if someone was really after her because of the coat? She could have been killed, and gotten Grant killed too. She started to back away from him, feeling panicked. She didn't want to drag him further into this mess, not when it was her fault. She was the one who'd taken the coat. She would have to figure out what was happening on her own. I don't want anyone else to get hurt. Look, thanks for saving me, Delia stammered, but I've really got to go. It was the middle of the day, and she was technically skipping school. But she didn't care. She couldn't face Harper and her friends being excited about how great their pictures had come out, or having to explain what went wrong, or why she'd run from the school. She had to get out of there. She turned and fled down the road, running for the train station. The train sped by the rooftops, zipping through the cityscape, lulled by the clickety-clack. Delia watched the buildings pass by the window in a rush, as familiar to her as the backs of her hands. But something was still bugging her. Climbing the stairs to the elevated platform had been harder than usual. Her muscles had felt heavy, and her joints almost numb. And it wasn't from the cold wind hitting the platform. She'd felt something similar when she'd woken up that morning, but that had cleared up quickly. Was something wrong with her, though? Did she need to see a doctor? Or was it somehow the coat? Delia glanced down at her hands, nestling against the soft faux fur of the coat. They appeared smoother than normal. She curled and flexed her fingers, and they tightened ominously. Feeling a twinge of worry, she held both hands up to her face and peered closer. Was it her imagination, or did her fingers look kind of plastic? Suddenly, her phone pinged, startling her. It was an alert from Pick Perfect. Delia hadn't checked her profile since... when? Since before the accident. She hadn't gone that long without clicking on Pick Perfect in ages. She unlocked her phone. Keep up your streak. Post a selfie. The alert message flashed at her. She felt panicked as she clicked on her profile. Had her ranking dropped? Relief rushed through her when she saw that her top ranking at Gilded Crest was still intact. But it wouldn't stay that way if she didn't keep posting. Users had to keep posting selfies and giving their followers fresh content to stay on top. That was the number one rule on Pick Perfect. Well, that and post #PerfectSelfies. Automatically, without even thinking, she held her phone out and aimed the camera lens at her face. Tilting her neck and smiling, her arms felt a bit tingly, but nothing alarming. At least she could move them. Click! The selfie came out perfect. She was even smiling in it. Delia's heart instantly felt lighter. Clearly, the situation with the school pictures was just a crazy fluke. Probably a technical glitch with the photographer's camera. Nothing more. Delia layered in hashtags. #LTrain, #TrainSelfie, #House of DeVille, #NaturalLook, and hit post. She watched as the selfie went live on the app. Heart emojis started to flood into the comments, and Delia felt a thrill each time a new one popped up. But then, something shifted. The selfie began to change, right in front of her eyes. White hair began to sprout out of one side of her head, while black hair sprouted out of the other. Heart pounding, Delia refreshed the feed. The hair was still there, just a bit longer. Refresh. Her part moved to the center of her forehead, dividing the hair perfectly in half. One side black, one side white. Refresh. Her lips turned bright red. What the? She hit refresh one more time. She couldn't seem to stop herself. This time her eyes looked odd. They looked almost as if they were swirling with strange yellow light. Delia almost dropped her phone. Suddenly, Little red devil emojis started to flood the comments and fill the screen, pushing her post down in the rankings. There were fewer and fewer hearts and more devils. No, no, Delia cried aloud. She tried to block the accounts that were posting the devils, but she couldn't stop them fast enough. For each account she unfriended, 5 more devils popped into the comments. She had too many followers, many from her viral post. The little red devil faces seemed to grin at her from her screen, as if mocking her hideous appearance. And how could they not? She looked like some kind of horror movie clown. Who was doing this to her picture? Had someone hacked her account? Suddenly, her phone pinged with a new DM. With shaky fingers, Delia clicked on the private message, hoping that it might provide some answers, but her stomach flipped when she saw the user's name on the account. It was from the Devil Woman. The profile pic showed a red devil face. Delia gasped when she saw it. Quickly, she scanned the message. The words jumped out, making her heart thump against her chest. Having fun with my coat, darling? Suddenly, a cackling laugh echoed through the train. Heart in her throat, Delia glanced around the train car, but it was empty. Aside from a few commuters with their heads buried in their phones, none of them were cackling at her. It was as if they hadn't even heard the laughter. Where did it come from? Her eyes darted back to her phone and that red devil face staring back at her from the profile pic. How did this random user know about her coat? A horrible mixture of guilt and terror crashed through Delia like a blast of bitter wind. Somebody who worked for the House of DeVille store must have seen her take it. Delia hadn't noticed any security cameras back there. But what if they were just hidden really well? Someone definitely could have caught her transgression on video and might now be using their knowledge of what she'd done to mess with her. She glanced down at the luxurious black and white coat draped over her body. Suddenly, it didn't feel so great to be wearing it. Delia had wanted the House of DeVille coat more than anything, but now she wished she could just get rid of it. All she wanted was for everything to go back to normal, even if it meant not being as popular on PicPerfect anymore. She remembered how she initially promised herself that she would return the coat after a few days. But then everything had been going so great, she had decided to keep it. Clearly, that had been a big mistake. Delia swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. At the next stop, Delia sprang up from her seat and hopped off the train. She was close to the shopping district now. She would return the coat to House of DeVille and end this mess once and for all. Harper would probably never speak to her again, but she would just have to deal. It was time to make this right. Delia bounded down Michigan Avenue, passing the crowded House of DeVille flagship store on her way to the alley behind it. The store was, of course, packed with shoppers. She paused in front of the windows, suddenly getting the spine-tingling feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced across the street. Idling at a metered spot was the Red Panther DeVille. Delia's blood went cold. Had the car followed her here? Was the driver stalking her? Terrified, Delia cut around the corner to the back alley where she had first discovered the coat. She had to get rid of it, and now. A row of mannequins was lined up by the dumpster. They were each posed in glam House of DeVille clothes and boots. Clearly, this was where they staged the mannequins, dressing them for the display booths and windows. Maybe that was why the coat had been out in the alley, because they were getting it ready for the store's display. Delia gulped. It was official. The coat wasn't abandoned. She had stolen it. Delia glanced around, but there was no one in sight. The alley was deserted. She approached the last mannequin in the row. This one hadn't been dressed yet. Its naked plastic body looked creepy next to the fully dressed ones. Delia hesitated for a moment, feeling strangely possessive of the coat, and ran her fingers through the soft faux fur. Almost like it had a mind of its own, the coat gripped her limbs to get tighter, like it didn't want her to get rid of it. Her arms started to feel tingly again. Suddenly, she remembered what had brought her back here. I have to return it, she told herself forcefully. It's the right thing to do. And if it made all these creepy things stop happening to her, all the better. Before she could second-guess herself, Delia stripped off the coat, struggling to peel it from her limbs. The coat clung to her like a second skin. It didn't want to let her go. Finally, with a desperate grunt of effort, she tore off the coat, panting for breath. She stared at the garment in horror. Why was it so hard to take it off? Then she dug through her bag for a paper and a pen and scribbled out a quick apology note. Sorry I took the coat. She stuck the note in the pocket of the coat and carefully draped it over the mannequin. Good riddance, Delia whispered and turned away. Instantly, she felt better, lighter and freer, without the heavy coat weighing her down and restricting her movements. Delia flexed her arms, bending her elbows. They no longer felt tingly. She could move freely again. Also, that strange plastic sheen on her skin was gone. A cold wind hit her, whipping off the lake. Delia shivered. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked briskly up the alley, needing to get home before she froze to death. The sun would set soon, making it worse. Vroom! Delia glanced around, feeling a stab of fear. But there were no cars in the alley. That was weird. She kept walking, picking up her pace. Vroom! Delia froze. 2 headlights snapped on in front of her, almost blinding her. She narrowed her eyes, trying to make out the car, even though she was sure she knew what she would see. And she was right. It was the Red Panther DeVille. Delia squinted over the glare at the headlights. She could just make out the silhouette of a woman with red lipstick and spiky hair. Suddenly, a cackling laugh emanated from the car. It echoed down the alley. How had the car gotten back here? Had it followed her down the alley? Delia backed away in terror. I'm sorry. I gave your coat back, she shouted to the driver, struggling to be heard over the engine's roar. Please leave me alone. Vroom, vroom, vroom. The woman was revving the engine again and again, taunting her, purposely drowning out her voice. Delia had to run, but there was nowhere to go. The alley was just wide enough for one vehicle to get through at a time. If the driver floored the gas, Delia was toast. Then the driver clicked on the brakes. Delia's eyes stung horribly, and she squeezed them shut, bending at the waist against the pane. The car was about to come at her. She could feel it. There was nothing she could do. Even without the coat weighing her down, she was frozen in fear. But then suddenly, silence. Carefully, Delia opened her eyes. The car was gone. The alley was dark. She was the only person in sight. But no, that was impossible. Cars couldn't just disappear like that. Another blast of cold wind hit Delia square in the chest, knocking the air out of her lungs and snapping her to attention. Delia couldn't explain what had just happened, but she was not wasting another second. She turned and bolted down Michigan Avenue, dodging the shoppers laden with hefty designer bags, and careened down the sidewalk toward the train. I gave the coat back, she thought in desperation, as she climbed the steps to the L. Just please leave me alone. The only answer was the cold wind hitting the elevated platform with a mournful whoosh. Standing there, shivering as she waited for the train, Delia was scared and lost and unsure. When she found the coat, it had made her feel like she was beautiful and popular. Tomorrow, everything would be different. But how? Without the coat, who was she?